Hello, Culture Matters Podcast. We're back again with another culture content. Before I introduce the topic, here's a quote just for this episode. The tyrant dies, and his rule is over. The martyr dies, and his rule begins. Soren Kierkegaard. The topic today is Deloitte's take on core values as it relates to retention. Retention on who? Employees, customers, shareholders. Will focus first on employees. First of all, who's Deloitte? You never heard of Deloitte? Deloitte is actually one of the big four. Who is Deloitte? This is a massive company, a global professional services network, one of the big four accounting firms providing audit, consulting, financial advisory, risk advisory, tax and related services, audit, accounting. They understand the numbers. They work with the biggest companies in the world, consulting. They understand business. They've got the smartest minds in the best institutions that they're attracting to their organization and sending these minds and these brains and these hands out into the world to work with some of the most exceptional companies. They've got the resources that span continents to figure out, the cutting edge understanding in science and all the sciences and integrating them into the business community. So when Deloitte says insert information, we're supposed to take it very seriously. And I think to a great effect, we do and we should. Deloitte has over 150 countries that its people engage in and through. 460,000 people worldwide. So what's Deloitte's take on core values and their impact on retention? First, what are core values? Core values. What exactly does that even mean? What's a value? A value is a way is a medium of transferring mental content, um, emotional content, behavioral content. It's a it's a medium of transferring content, ways of behavior, value. A value represents what we value. There's a there are behaviors attached to that. There are judgments attached to that. So a core value and the making what's implicit, what's not necessarily spoken, not necessarily written down, but a part of what a group acts out, what a group tolerates, what a group um, reveals in a group's interaction, making making that go from implicit to explicit in behavior, in nuance, in energy, in feeling, making it explicit, writing it down, clarifying it. It can scale uh, constructive qualities of individuals, right? The constructive quality of an individual that people choose to follow around a specific context. So let's say it's the leader, or let's say it's the founder. The founder has certain behaviors that may have worked in servicing the customer's problems at the highest degree. Servicing the customer's problems at the highest degree. These are the ways that we'd like to behave to solve our customer's problem at the highest degree. How do we transfer these when the people that work with us can't learn from us solely from spending time with us, from seeing us, from experiencing how we actually relate to the customers? Core values can scale, core values can scale the behaviors necessary to live up to the expectations that we desire to be lived up to, that are set by value creation, fulfilling the promises between the organization and its customers. Think of a value signifies behaviors. They are the roots, but the trunk grows from experience, work, um, tradition. Values, core values, is getting clear on the, almost like a filter. What do we believe? Where do we come from? What do we believe? Why are we here? How do we have to show up to serve our customers? What do we expect of others? Think of, I use this quote in the beginning of the podcast. The tyrant dies and his rule is over. The martyr dies and his rule begins. Value, when the values are clarified, so before they're even written down, the process of mediating the transcription of them, it can be, if facilitated constructively in a proper manner, a revelatory experience to an organization, because it will force us to look backwards. It will impel us to look at ourselves in the current, and it should inspire us to look into the future as a group, right? Where do we come from? Why do we exist? You know, what was behind the inception of the organization? Why did it start? Who started it? How did it start? What did they stand for? What was our purpose? What's our purpose today? What do we stand for today? How do we stand for it? What do we value? What do we actually value? What behaviors do we want to reward and recognize? What behaviors would we like to exemplify? What behaviors would we like to penalize? What behaviors will we not tolerate? Who do we have to be? What if we're each individual is aspiring to be the best version of what we'd have to be as it relates to the customer experience, the customer service, right? Think about this: customer experience. There's an experience, there's a relationships, there's a relating, there are certain ways of behaving in our culture that we recognize and or penalize. And much of this on a small scale can be done without clarity around the values, without having these conversations. All of this is a successful business, one that is selling, marketing, fulfilling, developing, you know, a reputation, in turn, a brand over time, because a brand is like the the mature the maturing of the reputation of the individual, the individuals among a customer group. The brand, it's become a brand. And at first it was a relationship that led to an experience that led to a reputation, that led to a referral, that led to exponential curve, and eventually a brand. And the culture is the identity of the organization, the character, a revealing of the identity of the individual, and the individuals, the ideal individual, the ideal, hero, the archetypal identity that shows up best for the customer experience, the customer value. Core values can help, are making that explicit. And the process of actually mediating what's implicit, explicit, looking back, looking forward, understanding where we are today, clarifying, the values, if there's a definition, if there's a meaning, if there's context, the values develop a meaning that people will get behind them, people will believe in them, people will share them, people will talk about them, people will but this is the thing, people will live them relative to those in positions of authority and influence that live them. It's not just the talking about them, it's not just the writing them down and going through. All of that is supposed to actually increase the likelihood of them scaling, in the sense that people will recognize how to behave and do the best to aspire to that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it will work. It won't work without the work. It won't work without the sacrifice, because there isn't work without sacrifice. It won't work without the acting out of the values of the organization. It just becomes and oftentimes companies will actually fixate on values as a consequence of not having them. It's actually a sign of, I believe that the fixation on core values is a sign that of an absence of value, an absence of vision, an absence of mission, an absence. But then it's like, well, duh. That's why we want to get clear on ours. But getting clear on them isn't the whole. Um, uh, it's not the whole. Uh, it's not the whole process. Getting clear on them is not the whole process. It actually can undermine the culture and turn the the and turn and twist and distort and bend the reality of what happens day to day into some dis, distorted marketing campaign. That's why people have bad tastes in their mouth about the culture conversation. Like, it's not pizza parties and words on the wall. It's it's leadership. It's, they say, accountability. It's responsibility. It's what actually happens. It they say, and it's been said on the Culture Runners podcast through various guests, the culture doesn't show up on the balance sheet, but it matters. If it doesn't show up on the balance sheet, how do we know it's there? Because it doesn't show up on the balance sheet, but when it's not there, that shows up on the balance sheet. It's invert, always invert. You have to think, what if things were at their worst? Culture doesn't matter until things are at their worst, which is part of the reason why people that explore culture, they're at their worst. The question is, can they be redeemed? Whether it's a person or an organization. That's why companies can, if the product, if you have product market fit and it's solving actual consumers' issues, then the management is, you have to look at the management. What can you do to screw this thing up? It's like that Buffett quote about, you give me a bad business and a strong management, it'll be the bad business that keeps its reputation. So in that case, the culture, the leadership, the people won't necessarily, will not be able to solve to that specific problem, because there isn't a tangible benefit. However, the culture can impact the innovation, the research and development, and the reinvigoration. Meaning, the people that work together, they can come up with new ideas, and in theory. So, what the heck has Deloitte said about values and the impact that they have on retention? You know, can values actually have an impact on retention? That's the question. Can values actually have an impact on retention? There's a quote here on a website. It's actually saying on the global customer growth and innovation at Salesforce, saying the fastest way to get your customers to love your brand is to get your employees to love their jobs. I don't think you get employees to love their jobs. I think you It's what you do to mitigate them from hating them. Because we can't get people purpose, but we can foster it. We can definitely undermine it. And so the question is, how do we undermine it? How do we undermine? Well, repercussions for speaking up, management that is do as I say, not as I do. It's twisted. The higher we go in the authority ladder, the less is expected of us. That tends to undermine relationships. It almost like I don't admire that person. I don't respect that person. I don't want to be that person. I don't, they're out of integrity. Like out of integrity would be, the values on the wall, those in management are doing the exact opposite. Now, this thing, doing the exact opposite of the values on the wall, because of the grayness of human nature is an inevitability. People make mistakes. The reason it's called a blind spot is because the individual is blind to it. It's when we are not communicating about these mistakes. It's when we're not saying what we think, or we are, but then we're we're not listened to, we're not heard, we're penalized, and that even itself is inevitable. Because there are degrees of, there's a relationship with management being able to hear the people and crisis, and like the actual external world influences how well feedback loops actually work. So I want to challenge the fastest way to get your customers to love your brand is to get your employees to love their jobs. And my belief is the reason this quote is what it is. Well, I think customers to love your brand is to get employees to love their jobs. It's inherent in that quote is okay, if the employee loves their job, the employee will relate to the customer in a way that the customer gets what they paid for and feels good about it. Now, do I need to love my job to perform my to perform in a way that provides value to a customer? Well, that would be dependent upon my own duty as an individual, my own obligation, my own responsibility, right? But the and I think as our culture's values are changing, as people, it's not that necessarily people may be less responsible. Maybe they're less accountable, meaning as our society becomes more entitled from greater resources, um, as our society becomes entitled from greater resources, and as technologies evolve to the point where we're constantly at odds with our own attention on our own self-determined goals, aims, desires, because we're constantly being dinged. Right now I'm recording this and some calendar thing popped up. There was a friction between the attention I have for myself, my own, right? I wanted to record this content about Deloitte's view of core values impact on retention. There's a self-determination in that. I prepared, I thought through this, I read a little bit, I wrote. There's a self-determination. I want to talk about this and think about this, and my attention is on what am I saying now? What did I say earlier? Did I make that point clear enough? Where is this conversation going? How do I make this valuable for the audience and all the benefits that come from that? And all of a sudden, ding, some notification popped up in the middle of this. As an individual in this culture, I am at odds with a society where my attention for myself, my self attention, my self aim, my own selfishness for myself that ironically creates value for the marketplace is being diluted and misdirected by these technologies, by these notifications. I'm at odds. I'm in an inner battle with myself at the most basic fundamental level based on my attention being distracted and uh, and aimed in different directions constantly. So of course there's a state of anxiety, a heightened state of anxiety for individuals. Now, if there's a heightened state, that affects the reasons, that affects the purpose, that affects the aim, because the purpose is tied with the aim. The aim is tied with attention. If my attention is constantly hit, how do I have an aim? How do I have a purpose? So of course it feels like the company has to give more and more of my purpose. But I don't think it does. I think individuals give themselves purpose, and the company is supposed to not screw it up. The company is supposed to, it's not what it does, it's what it to create the purpose. It's what it does, it's what it does not do that could undermine it, right? Don't penalize people for speaking up. Do recognize them for doing it. Reinvest in the company so that there's upward mobility and opportunity. Have higher leadership that are engaged, that are competent at that level necessary for the company to grow to the next level. The core values impact retention only if the people leading the organization are capable of acting and articulating them, acting them out and articulating them. They can have an exponential return on energy. But in the absence of the integration of acting and articulating them, then the thoughtfulness, the perceived thoughtfulness of articulating the core values wasn't thinking at all. It was actually just projection. And the paradox is those that pursue the articulating, the codification, are likely those that are not in a state of thinking. So how do you actually inspire a state of thinking? And I think that's where it comes down to the practitioner. So the practitioners that actually, almost like pushing the first domino and the domino effect of core values. What's the process actually look like of reflecting upon the past, projecting into the future, and clarifying in the present who we need to be as individuals and what we have to be as an organization to serve our customers and continue to serve them in the future and recognize the best behavior, live up to our ideals, and communicate with one another when we don't, and penalize and have true repercussions for those that defy what we stand for and who we are, and how to actually accomplish that. It is extremely difficult to accomplish that. And that's why having a chief executive officer that has a board incentivized to be a constructive, open feedback loop, a true accountability medium is key. Having a leadership team that's been hand selected based on competence and character and experience, and a chief interested in that team of rivals, like a Lincoln type, that's able to be not only intelligent, but adaptively intelligent and emotionally intelligent. It's like you keep going into all the variables needed, shareholders that are bought in and long-term orientation, and you add up all the variables of what it would take to have that culture, and before you know it, you have something that doesn't exist. So I would say, think about how you could easily screw up your company. Write down all the ways that you could destroy your company in your behavior with customers, with your teammates, with your partners and your shareholders. Write them all down and don't do those things. And Deloitte believes that core values have an impact on retention. Now, they might believe that because they've done all the research and gathered all the data, but I think common sense would say if we know what we stand for and we agree that we believe in these behaviors, when we don't do them or we do the opposite, we act in improper ways and people are not let go, well, then they're not going to have any value. If we act in proper ways and people aren't recognized, then we aren't going to act in those ways. If our leaders aren't acting in them and talking about them and there's an alignment there, we won't respect them. So core values are a component to success, whether written down or not. And as an organization grows, it goes from individual character to group identity, and they can be a powerful tool to scale a belief system and a philosophy necessary to compete cooperatively and develop and hone a meaning in one's life as one pursues their own individualistic goals. But it isn't a thing that's done once. It's a process that continues to reinvent itself constantly, forever, for as long as the organization's in existence. Share this with a friend that has interest in core values. Please leave us a review on the Culture Matters podcast and don't be a tyrant.